I love that immediately when I switched over, it said, your encoder is overloading. Great. Welcome once again, my friends, to the tavern. We will be doing another Tavernside Talks tonight, and tonight we'll be discussing kind of world building, building bigger and better worlds, as we have titled the episode for tonight. And so basically we're just gonna kind of all give our insights as to how we kind of build do world building, build kind of on the agenda, be like just kind of overarching world, kind of geography, and then like political structures and kind of cities and things along that nature. So that is what we are doing tonight, and thanks for being here. So let's see everything. Let me make sure that everything is good for audio wise, and then y'all say some stuff so I can make sure this is all check.
Every time. And tries to get us to talk every time at the start of the stream, and then he just leaves us because he hates us, bro.
Leaves us abandoned on the side of the road.
I was like, I can only monologue so long. Actually, I can monologue for quite a while.
Yeah, we're all DMs. We can talk endlessly.
I was
gonna say, if you can't...
If the line disconnects, I'll be talking for 10 minutes before I notice.
I know, dude. Someone would be like, man, that was a 2.5-hour phone call. And I was like, yeah, light work.
A DM saying I can't monologue that long? Hold on. That's kind of crazy. Also,
that's cap.
Digging the shirt, Logan. Always loving the representation of the merch.
It's so funny because I never planned for it to be on today. It just so happens that like the order in which I do my laundry, like the shirt always lands on Fridays.
Hell yeah!
Nice.
And of
I
course,
wish to be as organized to schedule my laundry.
And of course, we have Knox as well, who is snoozed out, but he's always hanging out in the tavern. So, world building. So I think, let me see if I can turn this music down just a smidge more. It is. The tavern really be bumping tonight. Okay. I will say that I think for me personally, I like to do large scale and then kind of zoom in when it comes to just overarching world building as a whole. And so I'm curious what you guys like to do and how you guys go about doing your thing. Logan, go ahead if you want to jump in.
I usually start with like a large idea similar to yours, like large scale, and then I build out my entire world and the whole areas around that like pivotal idea that I want the world to be around. So one of the campaigns that I'm building up a world for right now, none of the planes of existence are on any other planes of existence. Instead, the different regions of the world take traits from those planes of existence.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you tell me about that. That seems pretty freaking cool. Having kind of everything just smashed. Instead of like having like barriers, you're just like, here's everything. Go ahead and
if you really want to go over there, you can.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sign that's just 5 miles east. It's just like the fire plane. You're like, oh shit.
Yeah, better bring a flammable boat, like or flame retardant boat, whatever. Flammable's fine too. But.
Yeah, I mean, I think most boats are flammable, but
Connor, I'm curious because I feel like just because you're very counterculture, I feel like you do small and go big, but you tell us.
I absolutely do small and go big.
Yeah.
However, I agree with Logan. I tend to have a really big idea, and it's almost to my detriment. But I normally will come with like a big idea that's like either like I have an idea of where I want the campaign to go, or I know like what kind of bigger conflicts are happening. But more often than not, what ends up happening is I'll have that idea. I'll make an idea for a setting, but when it comes to actually the game I'm going to run, I find a small area. If it's in a city, it's a small district of the city. If it's a town, it's a relatively small town with some things going on outside it, and I build everything to go on there and I intentionally leave most everything around there blank, aside from some names and where people came from. So that way, like if it serves the story for there to be, a swamp over this direction, it's there. If it serves a story for them to be, like actually a holdout of dwarven refugees over to the, nearby, that works there. And if it works better for it to not be there, it's not there, But then as you flesh out the world, those things then exist, You start populating the map like that.
Well, I think that's, I do like that what you said, and that kind of is similar to what I do, is I like to when I make things, I like to kind of leave things blank. So when it comes to the overarching world, like for instance, because a lot of the games we're running so far with on the actual actual plays that we have on the channel. It's all in a world that I homebrewed and kind of made. It's all in this one continent, and so when I talk about like starting large and then going kind of smaller, it's like I kind of have like topics or premises for the areas, and then when I zoom in, I like to like there'll be times where I will just sit there and I'll brainstorm. I'll think, like, well, okay, what do I want to put here? And that's usually when I kind of start to like oh, are these gonna be plains? Oh, are these gonna be like a marsh? I like to put like geographical, like distinct like locations, and then like what you're saying, Connor, it's like when you focus in on something, you like then make a town, and then you leave kind of things a little bit kind of empty, and then as the story kind of progresses, then you can kind of okay, this makes sense, or oh, this is like, oh, you guys want to do this, okay, I can throw this here. Because I can't tell you how many times like I'll be running something and then something comes up in the game, or I'll think of something randomly and it just makes sense for it to be like nearby. One being the village that you guys met on the other side of the pass through the frost trail, like with the ice reelers and like the fishing guild. That was all something I had no intention, like it was not in the world until like literally you guys were like getting to the point where you guys were coming across that, and then I was like, well, shit, how is a city getting food in the winter? Well, obviously there needs to be like, a source of that. And so I was like, okay, and then you start to think of like, okay, obviously there'd be ice fishing, things like that, and how is this more relevant? So
absolutely, yeah. I think. Go ahead, Logan.
I agree with that too. I think like having large areas or like towns or something I usually populate, but I leave them kind of empty because I like having that something is there, but there's also all of that blank space around it, Right.
Yeah, because I typically will have ideas on what's around. I'll have something planned out, but it's not like there's no drawn map of it existing unless, there's a persistent player who's hell-bent on finding a map of the local region or something. Then sure, okay, these things are now defined around. But for the most part, it's like I have things in mind. So if someone's like, it can't just be like, damn it, we don't have any, like dwarven ore around. And it's like, well, there's not just a dwarven mine nearby. I have an idea of what the local region has, but if it suits the story, it's like, well, that's not there. But, there might be like, there's a trading outpost miles up the road, that you can get information there or something, or maybe buy it there, things like that. It's like, okay, well, that maybe I had no idea of a trade outpost being out there, but it's like, well, that fits the region, that fits the narrative, that kind of fits the world I have, and it suits the story much better.
Exactly.
Because that's the big thing too. It's like the world should make sense, but also it shouldn't make sense at the detriment to the play and the story you're doing.
Yes. 100%. I think that's really big, because I mean, there was I feel like grounding everything when it comes to like a fantasy world in realism, in the sense of just like to the minute scale of just like rivers run off and just like so fine detail, where it's like basically just the real life. It's like, that's cool, and I feel like for some people who do want to play like in a super hyper realistic like that, it's fine. But like I feel like in general, the whole point of like doing fantasy RPG is to like kind of break into some of that and just leave some of the realism behind, at least in some, at least terrain or geographical locations sometimes.
Right. I mean, I think it's always good to think of like normally like a medieval or late or early Renaissance era, like normally a Europe era, and take that as like, well, now magic exists.
Right.
So okay, so like maybe like people hire druids and rangers to go like around to all the crops, and I can't remember what the name of the spell is, but I believe it's like plant growth or something. But it's like cast spells to like bless crops, and like maybe that's just a thing. That's like a whole economy. Maybe there's different things. It's like, yeah, we could like mine metal like normally, but why not like send some people who are adept at spell casting, or like move dirt, move stone around, like just little things like that. Like, yeah, it's fantasy, but you could add fantasy to mundane roles.
Exactly.
And like just make the world feel a little bit more lived in.
Yeah, because I mean, not having clerics wouldn't always be party members for D&D parties. You probably do have like the church as kind of the hospital that people go to if they need healing or something like that.
Right.
Exactly.
And so I think I'm actually curious how you guys do your maps too, because you said you don't do a map of the region unless someone asks for it. Do you guys
I do not do maps?
You don't do maps whatsoever?
I do not do maps. I will draw maps for me that I will have, so I have a physical space, and I will draw signifiers, but I have never in any campaign given a map to anybody in a party.
I take my dice bag, I pour it upside
Actually-
down. D20s are cities, D12s are towns. The rest is just different things. Oh
There
man.
you go.
So I draw
actually-
my shit.
Yeah.
So like this was
what
the
I
frost.
have-
This is the
go ahead.
Frost Trail and the Dire Frost Woodlands where the Frost Trail was. I will say I need to be better about updating this. But generally, what I'll do, because for instance, like I gave a lot of like world lore when Morello was leaving, and I kind of generated a lot of like things that would be functioning kind of over to the east. Because here,
Right.
let's see if I can show you. How close can I get? Anyway. Yeah, because a lot of like over here I haven't fleshed out, but I put names to it whenever Morello was leaving and stuff, and so there's like more holes and there's more stuff. But I really like to draw it out, mainly just because I feel like that does, for me, it makes it so that I can just kind of keep track of everything as we do sessions, because I feel like if you always are kind of just like leaving things kind of blank and not necessarily, and that's fine. But if you don't fill it in as you build it, and as you continue and you start to compile these stories, then you're left either pouring through old notes and just being like, "What the fuck like happened?" or "What did I say?" or "What did I create?" Or you can start to kind of overlap and kind of break canon, which is like, isn't always the best thing to do, because I want to have like a seamless world where there's always constant like consistency. So that's why I'll draw out, and I haven't done any cartography in a bit, but I do want to go through and do that, especially since we are playing in a region of the world that I have not fleshed out. So that was Rowek, and Rowek was the first region that I really started to flesh out. I do have Bryforest, which I want to say was the one that we started all in person. But we did for like 6 games, right before that was when I was on leave, I want to say. But
Right. Yeah.
I kind of have a general understanding. I kind of have a rough sketch of what all the provinces kind of come together in an overarching continent, but I haven't gone through and actually written it all out.
Yeah, I do, like I said, I toss the dice down and I'll do like cities, and then I will do towns based off of like cities based off where my D20s drop out of my bag, towns based off where my D12s drop, and then I like to fill out from there, because then I have like each region is populated with this amount. Like, why would this region have more towns in it or something like that?
Right.
As well as I like having things that players can go back to. Like there is a altar at some point that has certain writing on it they can never read. If a player takes notes back about it, then I know exactly where that altar is because it's written down and I can see it on the map.
I hand draw an outline of normally a continent, just like a solitary body.
Mm-hmm.
I'll draw an outline and I'll scrap it, then I'll draw an outline, then I'll scrap it, then I'll draw an outline, then I'll scrap it. And about the 15th iteration, I'll have something that I like, and the first thing I will draw before I draw anything else is rivers. Because for me, like, water is like the most important thing for really any civilization.
Yeah.
Like, so I'll draw the waterways, then I'll draw the mountains, and then from there I'm like, where would a city make sense? And then the first city I put down, I put somewhere that doesn't make sense. Because it's a lived-in world with magic and politics and craziness. So it's like, it would make sense to be on this river delta between these two mountains. Like, all right, I'm putting it in the fucking desert. And, maybe something horrible happened, and like, this is the safest place to be. Or maybe a religious reason, or maybe there's a magical conduit here. And then you start adding that. But I will always stop at cities and regions. I'll stop there. That's as deep as I go. Then I fill it out as we start going. You're not going into blind darkness. There's things over there that I've built, but like, it's for like the improv between, like, where the story is going and what the characters want and all that, to fill it out and let it make sense.
Right. Go ahead, Logan.
I was gonna say, I think the only one that I did like super in-depth creation for was I have a sci-fi one going right now, and I have solar systems. I have drawings of each of the individual planets. I have drawings of the entire solar systems they go through, and I think I've got like 40 different pages of planets and what they
Holy
do.
shit.
And dude, it was tough, man. There's like I was like, oh Lord. So yeah, I've never done that again, because a lot of the planets never got explored either, but they were like all the way built out,
I have one drawing for my own sci-fi campaign. It is of the arm of the galaxy you're in. It has a lot of dots on it. Those are the solar systems, and it stops there. It is primarily a regional map, and that's it.
I think that's a good note, Logan, that you brought up. Though I feel like that's a big thing for when it comes to world building and just like session prep as a whole. I think that it can be very, very overwhelming when you do micro annotate, or you do flesh things out to such a high degree, because then it's like you're spending hours and hours and hours and hours on the session, and then if your party goes, yeah, by the way, we're going south, not north, and then you're like, great, I just fleshed out the entire north. This is now I have to like, spend hours and hours and hours now fleshing out the south. Now, obviously, that's not work wasted. That's one thing I do like about D&D is whenever you're prepping and things don't go exactly, as planned, you can always put that in your pocket and use later. That's what the one thing I do like about that, Sometimes there's ideas that you're like, cool, okay, they never knew about that, so now I'll throw it somewhere else and they'll just think, it's organic there. But that's something, yeah, I think that's just one of the big things is just kind of keeping it. I think doing prep is really important, but also keeping it loose to the point where you're just like, okay, we can flow as we need to.
Yeah, I do a lot of NPC generation where I do names for them, what kind of shop that they could be in, and what kind of personality they have, and I'll like explain a character, but they will be placed absolutely nowhere. And then when they're like, yeah, what's this character's name? I'll just look through the list of NPCs I have. I'm like, Frederickson, man.
Hell yeah.
So,
there you go.
So I will say one thing you were noting, because you brought up a desert, Connor, and so I will say whenever I usually especially for Woverin, which is the continent, I think it's important. Well, I mean, you guys can discuss what you think, but I think it's important to have every single kind of geographical location in the sense of just like having that diverse opportunity to play. Because I think that for the entire continent, because obviously there are continents that might not have certain things, but I wanted it to be like, oh, you guys want to do a desert thing? I have a desert. Oh, you guys want to do a jungle thing? I have a jungle. Oh, you guys want to do a freaking snow thing? I have a snow region or whatever. And I like having it, kind of broken up. And I will say, kind of even just world building, because it just also kind of gives you a lot of insight as to just like how the actual real world functions, which is kind of cool to also learn while you're doing world building. Like, oh, this makes sense because in real life, sediment or runoff, or in the desert, whatever. It's like that you can kind of D&D is almost like educational in some ways, depending on how in depth you want to get with it, which I also really enjoy when it comes to world building. I can't tell you how many times I look up words, or I look up like does this make sense? And I'll type things in Google and like just get little bits of nuggets of information to try to at least make more sense.
Right. Like when you're Googling if someone can cry when they have no eyes.
Exactly.
You learn.
Exactly.
It turns out they can.
Nice. Exactly. Educational.
I have never done a desert. I usually populate with a good amount of things, but as soon as you mentioned desert and you're like, yeah, you got to populate it with everything, I was thinking back. I've never played a campaign where I've been in the desert. I have never DM'd a campaign in the desert. The desert just doesn't exist in my D&D world.
I have had them go to a desert, but it wasn't like I didn't go too hard into it because I don't know, it really depends on what everyone's interest was. And I don't think everyone's interest was the deserts. The desert was a location that they went to. And things happened. It was nowhere like, there wasn't like Umpshampti. There wasn't like mummies. There wasn't like mummy rot polluting the area. It was more we're just like, we're at a ruin in the desert. Let's go inside. It's hot out here.
Yeah.
And then just...
Rust monsters, the best place to put them. The worst enemies in the game, but the best place to put them.
Yeah.
I think
they found a dragon down there, if I recall.
Are you talking about the game where there was not a single parchment in the whole city? We're like, yo, is there anything here? And you were like, nah, there ain't no writing. And we're like, anywhere? You're like, yeah, no, there's no writing anywhere. We're like,
yeah,
what?
And then you guys just went anyways and left. It did not look into that at all.
We're like, yeah, okay,
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, we're good, man. We like to write things down. We can't be in this area.
Well, I think that I do want to do a desert. I got snow off my itch with the frost trail, and I do want to do a desert at some point because desert is similar when it comes to the intensity when it like in a harsh frozen or a wintry biome, but just like kind of a different flavor. It's the polar opposite, right? It's like you have to be like, oh, you have to stay warm. Well, now you have to stay cool, hydrated. I think hydration would be an interesting thing when it comes to the desert. Anyway. Anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I mean that's not bad to talk about though, because
Create
like
water.
yeah, creating things in the desert. Like if you were to do an environment like that, what would your process be for picking things out? Because I think hydration would be a really cool mechanic to do, but like what else would you do if you were setting up a desert campaign? What are the first couple of things you're gonna do setting up a desert campaign?
First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make up a monster called a sand hag, and she's gonna have a illusion oasis.
Illusion oasis, yo, that's evil, bro.
Man said, "Come to my oasis," and they're just drinking like camel piss, but it's like, oh, it's water.
Well,
It's just sand, baby.
They're just eating just sand, but yeah.
I
Go ahead.
I would say, like, for me, it would probably be figuring out where structures would be placed, like, not just cities or something like that, but something I really liked from the Avatar was the library of Wangshi Tong, where it's coming out of the sand the entire time, and I really like structures like that from areas like that, because it gives intrigue of being like, well, this is probably abandoned, because it is coated in sand, but let's go and explore here while we're in the middle of traveling somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Really, if you think about Avatar, it's just a really good D&D campaign.
Oh, it's a wonderful D&D
absolutely,
campaign.
yeah.
Didn't I think Critical Role did it, or someone did it the Last Airbender, or Avatar, or no?
Avatar has its own. It has its own game.
Okay, I was gonna say. Oh no, I think the last thing Critical Role did was the shit, man. What was it called? The Legend of Zelda. Yeah, that's what it was. That's what I was thinking of.
Because Matt Mercer himself voiced Ganon.
Yeah, right.
Oh, nice. But no, I want to say because I heard about the Last Airbender. I think there's a role playing game for that, so that's pretty cool. There's so many systems out there, man. You can probably just find them for everything.
You can do whatever, and I think what I really like about 5e2 is how diverse you can do things with it. Like you can literally be like, you know what, I'm gonna create an avatar class for 5e. Here's all the requirements for a 5e class, and it's very easy to break down. Like, I mean, they're kind of a monk. Way of the Four Elements monk sucks, so you could start specializing it instead, and you're like, well, I'm a Way of the One Element monk, you know?
Hey, don't worry, I'm pretty sure that's one thing they really heavily revamped in Unearthed Arcana. I think they're going to definitely make that better come the new source book.
Oh, dear Lord, thank you. It's a terrible class. I wanted to play it, but every time I look at it, I'm like, this is literally the worst option if I'm going to play a monk. I
didn't look at it, but I figured.
I've done Barbarian Monk before for like a one shot just to be a luchador.
Oh shit!
So that was kind of fun, but even then I was choosing to be suboptimal.
Yeah, I did Way of the Drunken Master, Storm Barbarian. So there was a sandstorm around me every time that I'd be raging and get drunk. Oh
shit!
That was a bunch of fun, dude. That was so much fun to throw hands.
Well, I think a lot of the subclasses in the Player's Handbook are suboptimal because they came out in 2014, and then all these other source books are like much recent. So you're like, oh, these other ones are so much cooler, and it's because this is 1,000 years old, almost 10 years old, and literally, actually, it is 10 years old, damn near. And so it's like the balancing was so different from what they're scaling it up now to be.
Yeah. Do you want to play the default ranger? Or do you want to play Gloomstalker?
Yeah, literally, and you're like, obvious choice. But
Assassin Rogue still holds up to this day.
The what?
Which one?
Assassin Rogue.
Oh yeah, Assassin Rogue.
Well, the thief's getting an overhaul too, because the thief was kind of assassin was fine, thief was kind of mid, and then they're
renamed Rogue to Thief.
No, there's a thief subclass.
Oh, thief class, right?
Yeah, the subclass.
Who knows?
It's just
no one's ever taken it.
Yeah, it's not great. Well, didn't Farmer Steve, wasn't he a thief rogue?
Maybe
from the first one. I don't actually know if that was Gray's character, but I'm pretty sure he joked about
Farmer. I think it was Farmer.
It was Farmer. It was Farmer Kevin Alderwalker, but I don't think he was.
That's pretty much.
I will say though, so kind of looking still at like the kind of the broad overarching kind of thing when it comes to geography. How do y'all build like factions or like overarching political structures? Because for me in Wolverine, what I wanted to do is I kind of want to have a little bit of everything. I think that there can be a lot of like, especially for people who are more interested in like political. I know Connor, there's been times where you're like, I kind of want to like deal with politics and kind of disrupt things like that. And so like, I think it's really cool to add an overarching empire where there is a lot of those politics. and so you can kind of cater to certain characters like that. And if they, and you can almost make that kind of the premise of the game is, the politics and trying to see what was happening with that. But then I also wanted to generate areas that were a little bit more loose. And so like you have the empire in one province, and then there is still an overarching political structure in another province in Bright Forest, but it's more of like a trifecta. There's three different individuals kind of all co-running and kind of doing, so it's a little bit different dynamic, still overarching. And then I have Rowek, which is the one that I was showing that's more like the most fleshed out. And that one is kind of like it's also known as the frontier, where it's just like you have city states, and the city state runs themselves, and that's it. And then and they might trade and do things amongst each other, but there's no overarching like, hey, this is my land and you all need to like submit to me. It's like you go to a city, they have their own shit. You go to another place, they have their own stuff. And then in the last one, or actually I have two more, but I kind of like doing that where you have different isolated kind of systems scattered throughout, so you can kind of cater. But what do y'all like to do?
Personally, for one of my home campaigns, I have like a larger Imperial force as well that just kind of runs around. The sci-fi one that I have, they own a large part of the galaxy, and then different planes of existence have different systems in which they rule around. So like the Feywild, which they're in right now, is all like what is it? Kings and stuff. I can't remember what the name for that kind of government.
Feudal?
Yeah, I was gonna say feudal.
Yeah, feudal. So they're all feudal governments, and they each own a region of the Feywild, and depending on how far back and forth that they go with that, they all hate each other. They all want their king to be the king, and it's kind of Game of Thrones style for those factions, where it's like constant war all the time over each different region. But then with having a larger, more powerful faction, pretty much everywhere you go, I like to have like that faction trying to strong arm people to do whatever they want. So I really like having one large faction that's usually like, no, we are the correct faction, and we are trying to like strong arm you. But I do also have a bunch of smaller factions in a bunch of different areas that are either like, I mean, we can agree with you and we can work with you, but we still want to be our own thing because we're like a mercenaries guild or something. But we'll trade with you so you don't kill us, kind of deal.
Gotcha. And we're talking about governments right now. Right?
Yeah, we're talking about governments, or even just like large factions that that aren't a government,
Absolutely.
but they're considered to be organized.
What I tend to do, and it's a loose rule because I do have exceptions to it, but typically what I'll try to do is I'll make a government, say like off the top of my head for my sci-fi one, I have like the Nova Unlimited Mega Corporation, just essentially a government.
Yeah,
it's already shaking its head. And then I try to like take the concept of it, which is like a mega corporation, and then it's like, all right, let's add 3 levels of complexity to it. So like mega corporation, that takes over one. It's like, all right, let's add this weird religious element to it, and then let's add another part where it's just like this technocratic thing. So there's like, and then there's like, oh, then let's make all 3 of them work together and not get along. Because I think that's always more fast. Because like it's a government, but even especially even with like a feudal government, the king theoretically normally has absolute power. But that's true. But like for fantasy campaigns, I oftentimes make like there's a spy guild which works for the king but has probably too much power, and there's a merchant class that's running around doing stuff that probably is making money, like subverting blockades or royal decrees or something. Like there's different levels of things where people are like, they're all, even if they're supposed to get along, they are, but there's always something else happening. There's always something else. They're either interacting positively or negatively, but they're never totally in agreement with what they're doing.
Well, I think
I always like making politics unfortunately complex, probably.
Well, and I think that's what I really like about 2 is about making an overarching political like structure in an area or the world that you're building, because I feel like it lets you add a lot of those other agencies. So I feel like in any political entity or whatever, there's always gonna be factions that are working either alongside with to navigate or do things under the table, or to make themselves more powerful. There's always so much different dynamics. Or then you also have the people who are like, fuck you, because of the overarching political structure, we're gonna go do our own thing, and then that's when you start to find the other little like sections of just like self-governed areas too.
Right.
I like having adventurers guilds in a lot of my campaigns too, as like a isolated business. So no matter what government or whatever area they're in, they're like, we are the adventurers guild. We have so many people hired out that no one will ever mess with us, kind of deal. So that's a lot of fun for the people to go into a town, for it to all be one way. It's like, hey, in this town you can't have any ale or anything like that. We absolutely do not allow it. And then, the entire government is siphoning that away, but then the Adventurers Guild hires out super strong adventurers, so they're always like, nah, man, we're gonna get crunk in here, dude. Ain't no one gonna stop us, dude.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's like, we don't follow the rules.
Yeah. On that note, I recently discovered there's no better way to piss off your party than having the local government confiscate their booze. There's no better way to do it.
Oh shit.
Actually, it doesn't matter for me, but yeah, still. We almost had one of our players in that one like absolutely murder someone because they were taking the booze, and I was like, bro, it's good, man, it's good, we're good, I promise.
I feel like there's also just there's just always something about like the trope of like, yeah, y'all having a good time until the guards show up, and then you're like, oh, Fred, it's like, oh, fucking, it's okay, and then you gotta deal with those posers because they think they're better than everyone else.
I love cowardice guards too, like having like an iron fist ruler in an area, but having everyone a part of that area being like super scared of everything. They're scared of their ruler, and they're scared to do things for other people. They're like, man, we're just trying to take our taxes and go home.
Shit.
I don't want to be here either.
Yeah, they don't want to be.
Yeah,
I love that trope, dude. It's so good. Yeah, like, I don't want to be here either. I don't want to be collecting your taxes. You don't want to be giving me your taxes. He's gonna kill me if I don't do it. He's gonna kill you if you don't do it. So like, just give me the money, man. I love having people like that too, because it allows players to be like, man, I really feel for these guards, like this government system kind of sucks, and like I want to try and help get them out of it. But it also,
if initiative's rolled, I will not hesitate.
Yeah, that kind of, they're like, if they draw their swords on us, it sucks that that's your 9 to 5, man, but you drew your swords, you were asking for it.
Yeah. So, one thing that you said, go ahead, please.
No, that was it. I usually end with like connecting words, and it's awful.
You're fine, man. I was just gonna say something that you said, Jared, is talking about the government structure. You said like normally there's gonna be a group going like fuck you to the government, and like normally, in some way, shape, or form, there. I just wanted to bring about like I like that trip of there's always gonna be like some group, especially making complex empires. Whether the players agree with them or not, there's going to be some rebel faction. Maybe not proper rebels, but some people who are very anti-authority.
Exactly.
And I like to have always, in some way, shape, or form, either they have spies in there or they are supplying them one of the governments or a wing of one of those parts of the government, supplying or infiltrating or being a part of that too. Just because, like, why wouldn't someone just like trying to get a one-up on his political career? Just like, yeah, I'm gonna like help spur on and create a bigger problem, so I can swoop in and sit and fix it. Like, why wouldn't, another faction that's like, we don't want to overthrow the government. We're the government. But like, if you guys go, like, if we direct your anger at the merchants district, then we can like take over, it might be like, say like the guards faction. They let them take over the merchant district. They come and take it over. Then like, oh, now we're in charge of the warehouses now.
Right.
Just like little grabs for power. Just governments, I like them using people and ideas and entire like movements as just tools, because when things have that much power, why wouldn't they?
Right. Well, I mean, it's very relevant and just the money.
It's not even focused on anything in the. I don't know. The autofocus is not on. It's focused on nothing.
Turn off autofocus and then become literally Jesus.
Yeah. I can do that again if you want.
No. That was funny though.
Really? You sure?
This man said, yeah, I'll give it a shot, and then just came back and there was no
background. There was just light emanating behind me.
Yeah.
What's up, Logan? Go ahead.
Have you ever had your players form their own government? And if so, how did you deal with that? Because I have, and it was a process to figure out how other governments start to agree with like the form of government your players create.
I would immediately look at it. I have never had it happen, but I'd immediately look at it like Napoleon Bonaparte. when he came about, because he's just like, by the way, we deposed the king, and everyone's like, don't do that. Stop doing that. You guys do that a lot. Then it's like, I'm now emperor of France. And everyone's like, we don't really, like, some governments agreed a little bit, but for the most part, everyone was very apprehensive. And then Napoleon did Napoleon stuff, and things got more complicated. But just that initial stage of like, oh, you're kind of a pariah state. If I'm guessing when the players made a government, it was in the absence of a government. Like either they collapsed it or they.
No, they found enough people, and they slowly started it, and I was like, I think I know where this is going, and I can't really do anything to stop it because everything you guys are doing correctly. Like, these people love you. You guys are rolling well. You guys are like feeding these people. You guys are giving them drinks. You guys are like, when you guys are out hunting monsters and then like nearby area, you guys are like, I was like, and then they killed a nearby government, and then like in a different area, not related to that government, they started a new town, and they're like, hey, like, there's no one protecting you guys now, but there's this new startup over here that you guys can come to, and so I had to deal with the like how many people are gonna leave this area because it's now in a struggle for power over here, like France guillotine era where they were just chopping people's heads off for the shits and gigs, man.
Yeah.
Well,
it's attractive.
I've never had that occur, but I think that it just kind of depends as to where exactly it happens. So like Connor was saying, if it was in the Empire, it'd be immediately, I think, would be shut down pretty quick. Like, it'd be one of those things where like they'd be, last standing in a barricaded city until they were overrun, depending on the resources that are allocated to it. But if it was somewhere else in the world where it's like, the frontier, where like it's all just like individualized city-states and stuff, then I feel like if they're to be successful, then what can you really do at that point? Besides maybe turning your campaign from we're adventurers to now like Civilization 5, where you're now building up your empire and you're resource managing, and so it's like it just kind of depends. I mean, that's what you guys want to do, then I suppose sure. But I think the most that realistically the most that any players could do, unless they were super top tier high level, would be like take over maybe like a farming village or take over like a certain thing. I just feel like when it comes to power, when it comes to like cities and stuff, I just don't think, unless you're like a level 20 party, true polymorphing into dragons and just destroying everything, I think it'd be very hard pressed, at least in my mind, in my world, to be able to do that.
As a player,
go ahead.
With a cult of kobolds at level 15, we did just take a city. We have a city that we started with our cult of kobolds a long time ago, but we just brought them and we marched on a city. So it is possible. It took months worth of like sessions inside the city and battle strategies out the ass. Dude, I read The Art of War for that campaign. Dude, I was ready to go, man. I starved everyone out, man. It is possible. So like I've been on both sides of having to DM for that versus now where you mentioned the civ mechanics, which is really funny because I sat down with our current DM who is DMing the one where we just took the city, and we made actual civilization mechanics for D&D.
Right, yeah. That's all I was gonna say. Is I think you need to add new mechanics to like the governmental structure. If here's resources you now need to keep track of, and how are you guys gonna go about, either ordering your subservients to go get them, or maybe like, hey, new campaign arc, we need a shit ton of wood to fix the city. Maybe we need to go get it.
Hey, people are relying on us now for food, so now what?
Something about trebuchets and just wildly launching them over the walls kind of, made repairs real expensive, and we're still in the process of that.
It's kind of funny that you bring that up.
Something about alchemist fire on the trebuchet.
The kobold cannons too, there was a lot of corpses that had to be scraped off the streets.
No.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because literally Evan's character in the Red Mire Hunt started talking about literally shooting like dead corpses of animals over like the walls and just talking about siege warfare randomly at the table, and we're all just kind of like, why do you know so much? And he's like, I just heard things. It's like,
I just heard things.
Like, I think what about
bonding moment for him. Yeah.
Faction building. I had a lot of fun in the campaign that I was a player in of like starting a cult of kobolds. Like it originally started because we found some, we didn't murder them, and instead we just gave them bags of gold, so they followed us around for a little bit.
Nice. Yeah. Like Pavlov's dogs, but
yeah,
sentient creatures.
You raid
Yeah.
like dragon areas, you give them dragon parts, you give them gold, and then they stay with you. And then eventually, like, we got to the point where you had to start picking out ideals for your faction now. And I wonder what you guys think about that, like of like letting your players have a small faction of people who follow them around. If they do something amazing in a city, would your players become famous? Kind of
I
deal?
would. And this is tying into Jared's point. Is like, I don't know if I'd let anybody, like, unless they're like level 20, take over your city. I think I would let a much earlier party do that if they did so with a faction type thing. So it wasn't the party walking in and it's like, this is Bill's town, but like, no, this is like, you know, like, just through subterfuge or assassination or whatever it is, you know, like taking over. And now the faction owns the city, and maybe you're at the head of the faction. As far as ideals and such go, I think those are kind of just role-playing moments that I don't know. I think it's important to let the players be aware and cognizant of like something, whether through like NPC conversation and such, as people are trying to figure out why they're starting to do what they're doing. But I think, as you're saying, they're like famous actions, like in a city, of like, just because we're on a big siege warfare type trend of like, if you hold the breach and like everyone drops around you, but you just have that one paladin just holding it down for 6 turns before reinforcements come. That's a notable thing for one, probably a point of inspiration, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't see why that can't become like a thing for that faction to rally behind, to become a bigger thing, to kind of steer an ideal and make something like set in stone as like a function of your faction.
And I think to build off what you were saying, I think it does make a lot more sense for a group to like be part of a coup, like you're saying, with the faction, because I feel like if a bunch of randos like kobolds pull up, shiv the shit out of the Baron, and then they're like, hey, we're the leaders now. I feel like in general, people being like, who the fuck are these randos? I feel like even the normal people would be like, we should probably kill these guys because they're kind of like that. That's kind of weird.
No.
But
you're forgetting one very important part, is that you have a bard roll really high in the town square.
Oh yeah, my bad. Just play.
A bard roll really high, dude. You just bring 300 kobolds to a city at night. I don't. That was really what he did.
I'm talking about hearts and minds. I'm talking about him just being like,
not tyranny.
Treat you as
Rule with
deliverers.
fear, bro.
Hey, never mind.
Join us or get shanked by 30 kobolds. They all have pack tactics. I don't know what you want from us.
They travel in groups and they know why.
But I think that a faction of players joining a faction, and then that faction already having some sort of relevancy in the town, definitely makes it much more like realistic, in the sense of like, hey, we overthrew this leader, or we did a very notable deed to where everyone's like, yo, this faction's sick, we hate the current group, or hey, maybe the faction's stepping up and is taking charge in the midst of something. And I feel like that, yeah, I think that would be a much more kind of grounded way for, I think, a group to kind of take hold. Now, obviously, if you have a shit ton of people, like 300 kobolds or whatever, you know, then I guess you know, it starts to get a little bit more. It starts to the tides start to sway in the favor of the players who are rallying an army. But
I'm gonna be honest. I'd cast Fireball indiscriminately to the herd of kobolds. Yeah,
you just
there'd
start
be
launching.
10 kobolds left to run the city.
And that like really brings up too, is like, how well do you shore up your cities beforehand? Do you guys like have guards in certain areas that do rotations and stuff, or is that just something that naturally happens? As like, say, we did something in our sci-fi campaign where we had to steal something off the train. Like, how prepared were you for that up until a few sessions before the train when we were doing stuff?
That was, the train components were fully fleshed out. And I think that's probably the most I did as far as like getting something fully made up. But the reason I did that is because I had a lot of side things you guys could do as the days ticked down. So like certain things you did helped or hindered, removed guards, added guards, removed like whole carriages were added to the train before you got there. But like there was rotations, there was deployments, and there were certain things that were all planned, like rotations. I had the idea for all those laid out, but then, you know, when they started happening, especially with how it went, there was a stealth component going on in the train for a moment, but as soon as it stopped happening, the patrols didn't matter that much. It was more of like where the guards physically were when initiative started. And explosions kind of happened a lot. People were thrown out of windows and people were decapitated by hydraulic lines. You know, there was a lot going on. But like, I had the guards figured out, picked out, very much in mind. It's like, oh, they're going to be at 5th level when they do this. This is where everything's going to be. And right now, it is a very, very difficult thing to do. And then things change. And I would say you guys made a number of smart decisions that made that situation easier for you, but at the same time, things that made it harder for you. But that was just something I had set up ready to go, and then just like, all right, let's let the players, like, things they're doing in the world before this happens are affecting what's going to be going on in the train.
Right.
For instance, the whole ass mech being added to the back of the train was not a thing until
a certain group did certain things. One group was the A team, and another group was the F team, and then it was just
that one group's just like, we're gonna go into the most lockdown situation. We're gonna bluff our way through it. We're gonna put on some accents. The other group's like, we're gonna set off a bomb in a town square.
The two types of campaign,
which is funny because the stakes were so like opposite, and then it was like in theory they should have had an easier time, and if anything, I feel like we would have had to shoot our way out of it, but it was the total opposite. They ended up shooting their way out of a simple scenario. We ended up bluffing our way out like successfully out of another scenario. So it's just weird how D&D works.
And I think that really those like two examples are very much, you have to set up your city in different ways depending on the group you have, because if you have one city that's just going to light a bomb off as soon as they get into the city, suddenly, like, as I'm prepping up cities for the rest of the time, I put more guards on more rotations and stuff like that, versus a group that's going to be quieter. The only places a lot of guards are going to be is over like high value areas or guard towers.
Right. Well, and a lot of it, as we're talking about world building, it's just there's a certain component of I can write down as much as I want to write down, but the world does not really exist, and I don't know the direction it goes in until after session 1.
That is such a key point, and I actually love that you brought that up, because I really feel like it's very, like, a lot of world building stuff can also be kind of attributed to character building. I feel like you know what your character, like, for instance, like, you know, you're building a character, you have like, ideals, bonds, and you think you know what they are, but then when you're actually role playing and you're in scenarios and and then you're like, and then things start to connect, like, this part of the backstory actually make him act a certain way or differently, and then you start to kind of start to flesh him out in the actual organic nature of the character. Similar, like you were saying with cities, it's like you have ideas, but then it's like as they're actually exploring and as things are happening, things start to make more sense.
If characters would ever write a backstory, dude.
Yeah,
it
literally.
would be wonderful, man. If you could ever get a backstory, dude, it would make your life so much easier, dude.
Hey,
can I get a backstory 7 sessions in, please?
Hey,
I'm still waiting on Evans. All right, I'm still waiting on Evans for Hexam Run. It's been about a year.
Hey, World Building 101, harass your players 6 months in advance to give you a backstory, so maybe you can have it by session 1. Probably not.
I have all of the ones for the one world I'm building with everything like slapped together. I'm like, I'm not even thinking about a session 0 or finishing generating the world until I have backstories for everyone's character. This is the regions that exist. Now give me your backstories, and then we can go from there. I'm not doing this again, man.
Yeah. Which, thankfully, the sci-fi one that I keep calling Axum Run, realizing that people watching might not know offhandedly what that means. That one is very loose, so like I know what his character is, we know who his character is, he's brought up backstory things, it just has not been written down.
Exactly.
And at this point it is what it is.
Speaking of which,
that stuff, I'd love to see it, but
5 more paragraphs for the planet about to be finished up to send to you. Since we haven't gone there yet, and I only did a few on it, I guess.
Hell yeah, I'm excited for that. The duality of man, really.
The duality of man, and wanting a backstory and never getting it, and then trying to like not. That's the other thing, is when you're trying to generate the world, once you're playing with people, you're trying to make sure you don't mess up the story that your players want to have for their character, while also being able to build things into your world.
Yes, I find I really try to add things for people's backstories very often in the game, because in that setting in particular, it's just huge because it's space. But you did things in the past, and I don't know if you've been alive ever, but you interact with people from your past fairly often, whether you choose to or not. It's like things will end up happening, especially if you've been doing this job for a while. You're gonna see somebody, like maybe you double crossed, or maybe an old friend, or whatever.
I think that feels better too for like on the player side. I really like pulling that in, because that's not something that you're like, oh well, I made this NPC, here is this NPC for you to see. It's like the player put a lot of work and time into the NPC, and so they get to see all of the effort that they put in is in something that you bring to life. And I really enjoy doing that too.
I try to. Evan doesn't get to see any of his fun stuff. Backstory. Oh man, I'm kind of... Evan, if you're watching, I swear to God.
But kind of not only tying backstories into the actual gameplay, but I think it is also really important on annotating things that happen and making cause and effect things too. Because obviously, there's backstories for jumping off points, but then also tying things back into story when it comes to like interactions that they had or how they affected. Because I think that was something that you did really well, Connor, when it came to Axiom Run, the sci-fi game that I jumped in for a handful of episodes, but it really felt like everything that was going on was like within like a days later or a couple of days, things that were where they were constantly fluctuating and moving. And I think that's one thing that I need to kind of get a little bit better about is cause and effect, because you can be like, oh, my character goes and punch, one of your players goes and punches the guard in the face, and it's just like, you wouldn't say bogging it down with that interaction, but there needs to be cause and effect, right? Or like say you helped a beggar and it's just like a small thing, and then like maybe 5 years later or like months later you run into them and they have that interaction. Just because I feel like that is the like those like core memories of D&D has been like, oh shit, that like actually mattered, or like your backstory gets brought in. You're like, oh okay, like my time and effort was like is being rewarded just by having that exposure, that interaction.
It's not always rewarded.
Or I was about to say
it's not always rewarded.
I do want to say one thing on that, because I do love the cause and effect thing. I possibly need to stop steering towards it a bit. I might be on the other end because I do love it, but also I want to let new things happen.
Yeah, also true. You
which is really, it's a difference between farming and harvesting type things. Like, let's let new things happen that could create more situations later instead of getting the payoff from those past situations, or letting it take more time.
Yeah.
But additionally, and this is again very much on the other campaign I've been doing, cause and effect for choices not made are also very important.
Ooh, yeah.
Like, like, oh, you didn't want to go do that quest. Well, the consequences of that happened.
Yeah, okay, that's a good
somewhere
point.
over there. So,
I usually just go, oh, you did that quest? I'm gonna put that for somewhere else, and they never fucking matter.
That's really smart, because if it was like something important but they never hit it, it could affect them later.
Yeah, especially if you have a type of world where like there's a lot of traveling back, like maybe the players have like a home base or something. Maybe traveling back along a road where they didn't like want to interact with whatever was going on in the mine. Well, now the town's dead. Now there's a lot of big ass spiders everywhere, and we don't know what's going on. You should have found out about the spider cult, and you just got to deal with it. Maybe not that dramatic, but especially like I think as DMs we've all experienced. Like, I have this set up here for multiple sessions of buffoonery, fun, and combat going on, and you guys just you're going that way? Okay, you're going that way. And it's like, you could always like take it and it's kind of on the road ahead of you now, like, which I'm a fan of. But there's also like, actually, okay, well that happens then. What you didn't deal with transpired, or maybe someone tried to deal with it, or maybe someone dealt with it properly. Whatever's gonna make more sense for your story, whatever's gonna be honestly more annoying for your players is probably ideal.
I like
another group came in and just handled it, and they did a great job.
They did wonderful. They are getting jobs before you guys are.
Yeah, you lost rep.
Has, what's it called? The like omens that come up, and if you don't deal with them right away, there's like a worse effect for it later.
Mm-hmm.
I love doing that with the only thing that I've ever done where people don't go to it and it happens later is like if there's a cult somewhere doing a like ritual and they never get stopped, the ritual is just gonna finish, man. Like no one ever went to stop them. So
for sure, yeah. There's I got some things in the oven, I'll say.
This motherfucker, this dude. Hey, tune in on Sunday to see this exact shit play out.
Look, man, he's trying to kill you
Sunday,
guys.
or also in the home game, I have some things going on like that. But more of it's just like I like the idea of living in a persistent world. I don't like in video games. I don't like it when there's like quests going on. Some of them are timed. Like if I'm trying to remember, Kingdom Come Deliverance did that, and that was very frustrating. Because it's in a video game, I don't want that. I want to be able to do everything. What do you mean I'm limited?
Yeah, right.
Like under like certain story things branch, but I want to be able to make that choice. And in D&D, I feel like that's a type of game where it's like, well, no, you don't get to just necessarily go do everything. Like, there's quests and there's things, and it's a lived-in world, and these people should have lives that develop and grow outside of you being there. Obviously, I'm not, as a DM, going to be like, and Gertrude got 15 years old. Like, it's, you know, I'm not role-playing it.
What
but
happened
it
to
happens.
Gertrude, Connor? What happened to Gertrude?
She got 15 years older in a year. She ate some bad peaches, and now, like,
Now she's
on death's door. But
now she's a sand hag.
you guys would have known if you did the orchard quest, obviously. Yeah, but it's just more of having things happening in the world that develop. And also not necessarily things that they ignored, just like things happen when they come back. There's just, like, a fishing village is now devastated. It's like, oh, something happened to the fishing fleet. It doesn't have to be a monster, it could be nature. It could be, you know, just an omen of things to come.
That's you mentioned that, and you know something I never actually did in any of my games or ever thought about? Natural disasters. I've never thought about an earthquake or like a tornado. I've just that's actually kind of nuts that I'm thinking about this now.
Yeah.
Hold up a minute, I gotta scribble down some notes for my next question when I hit my players with a sandstorm.
Like they're just in a cafe enjoying coffee.
Or it gets split in half by an earthquake as those tectonic plates shift and smash and rise.
Yeah. That's one thing in D&D I think is hard to do, because everybody wants there to be a monster or a reason for it. Like, but I don't see a reason. It's like, there's an earthquake. What happened? What god got angry? It's like, well, maybe none of them. Earth does that. Like, like, it could be a god, and maybe like different religious groups are using it, you know, in the aftermath. Just like, oh, you guys have been like turned away from, you know, this god or that god, and now the church is being, different religions are being weird about it. But like, it also could just be, hey, an earthquake just happens. That's an option.
Yeah, that could also be a very good starting point for, like, because you when you think about, like, when I think about like starting out parties at first level, you're like, okay, they can fight goblins. But I never actually thought about, like, oh, they can find a village that just got hit by an earthquake, and, you know, you can do, like, non-combat related things to help people out, and really also flesh out characters and see how they act also. So that's actually really cool. What were you going to say, Logan? Go ahead, Logan. I feel like you've been trying to say something.
Well, no, you were talking about the adventuring hook, and for, like, adventuring hooks all the time, I do agree. I do a lot of, like, oh, well, this is your first quest, you're going to, like, go and kill some of these people, or like go grab something somewhere for someone. But one of my favorite ones that I did was a town was getting sieged by a small group of things, and they never did pretty much any combat the entire time, but it was fun to watch the players interact with, like, these houses are burning down, we have to go stop these houses from burning down, and we have to start pulling as many people out.
Just and then disaster relief.
And
humanitarian efforts.
They could only get a certain amount of things done, so it was like, all right, you guys have to decide, like, where you guys are going to go and what you guys are going to do, because there's only a certain amount of time before, like, 5 turns, this shed is going to be burned down. You can't do anything about it 5 turns afterwards. And I think that I like combat, or not combat technically like that, but dynamic combat, where your players have a goal rather than, hey, we're going to kill this monster, it's going to take this many turns. Instead, it's like, doing that as an adventure with natural disasters would be really cool, because then your players only have X amount of turns before, say, an avalanche hits or something like that. Like, what are they going to do to stop?
Tiny hut.
Tiny hut, man. Tiny hut.
Shelter in place.
Yeah, well, but then you're under 40 feet of snow. But
hey,
no, I agree.
And then it drops and you just get crushed. Anyway.
And also it lets you use more creative uses of different spells and such. Like, maybe the barbarians is like, oh, I'm going to go into a rage, so take less damage going through this fire to get these people, and I'm going to use my axe on the door to get through. You know, like, or like different, especially, I think that's a good point for letting, like, low-level casters, which normally just get the shit beat out of them at low levels. Like, oh, you picked up a bunch of useful spells. Like, let's see how creatively you can use, like, Gust of Wind. I don't know how low of a level Gust of Wind is. That might be 3rd level. But anyways,
I think it's whatever.
It's one of them, man. Doing more creative things with that. You know, it's like to manipulate the environment to help people, or whatever it is that is required of that situation.
Yeah, that's something I never really considered, and now then I have an earthquake. Next game, immediately an earthquake's gonna happen. 2?
2nd level.
Oh.
2nd level spell?
Second level spell.
Oh,
Yeah.
second
Okay.
level.
I was
Yeah.
curious. So I was just like, let me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like that. I think that's nice for low level encounters too, or even high level encounters. Because if you have a couple very powerful druids in your party, or a wizard that has a huge amount of utility spells at the end of the game, there's not a lot of uses for them in certain encounters. But if you go into an encounter like that, it makes the spell book more diverse. Because I play in a lot of campaigns where it's like, well, this is a wizard. This is the 10 spells this wizard has. That's another wizard. That wizard also has those 10 spells, kind of deal. And it's not a lot of diversity in picking
Right.
spells.
I think for higher levels it'd be a lot of fun to mesh them, just environmental hazards. Like the siege area might make sense, but even like there is combat happening and an earthquake happened too, and there's a population. So like certain members are fighting, certain members are dealing with this disaster relief. Certain members, especially if a high level wizard, are probably doing a little bit of both. Like I'm like feather fall on them and then just cast a spell over there when I have time.
Yeah, and then you can even also have like entities creating them too, because I mean, talking about spells, you have spells that can cause earthquakes. You can have things that also generate natural disasters, but they're using the arcane to do it.
Yeah, I don't see why there can't be an earthquake so severe that it opens up a rift and lava elementals are starting to crawl out to their new environment.
Exactly.
Yeah,
which sounds like a lot of fun for everybody involved.
Dragons, man. Bro. Dragons taking entire areas is like a very fun mechanic to see the whole ecosystem of an area change just by something that large being nearby.
Yeah.
Right, because they even mentioned in the books that like the layers and stuff, like as they hang out in areas, it like permeates and things will start to change because just of their proximity for ancient dragons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I think also
is great for creating. If you're looking for world building outside of that, I love to do deep diving into Fizzbank's Treasury of Dragons because there's just pages on pages worth of stuff, and that was.
I might have to pick that one up. I've heard good things about it. I haven't seen that book yet. But...
Standard D&D, like I do enjoy what the information that they do have on each dragon, but it was pretty kind of just open-ended on a lot of it. They're like, these black dragons, they're in the swamps, man.
Yeah, or it was hard set and there wasn't a lot of diversity. It's like they exist there and they have this thing and that's it. And they're always like that. Whereas I feel like, I mean, I haven't read it, but I feel like, whenever they usually come out with an expansion, they usually have to like actually flesh things out like a little bit more.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. In some of the books they have, it's just like, hey, by the way, here's what you can do with a lot of those monsters we brought up back then.
Exactly.
Like,
which actually caveats perfectly into another topic that I wanted to bring up was how do y'all, this is pretty broad, but how do y'all build and generate lore when it comes to things, whether it's cities, areas, and stuff like that? Like, what is your like kind of starting point when it comes to like lore and just kind of the past or how things operate, or how do you guys create that?
I like to just it varies depending on each campaign and kind of which area I'm in, but a lot of the time I like to have cities have one solid belief system, whether or not that's in a god or in the government itself, and then build a lot of the lore around like, okay, why does this group of people believe in this? Why do these people believe in this? And like, how does that clash together when it comes to pantheons and stuff like that, or not even just pantheons, but some people are like, well, we don't believe in any pantheon, and so then there's a whole setup of like, why is this faction itself like not believing in the pantheon? What is it about that faction that like set itself differently? And I like to generate the lore around usually the larger beings of the world and figure out like how that affects the world.
I like that. I do a lot of things with larger beings in the world, but I think a lot of what I end up doing, for settings, what I'll normally do is I'll like just general settings when I'm making the whole setting for different things that happen. It's like, all right, what's something that maybe happened 10-ish years ago, 100 years ago, and 1,000 years ago? Let's think of like 3 larger things, because I don't like, and for the 10 years ago, it could be as simple as the monarch change or whatever, but like a thing that happened. Then like 100 years ago could be like a brutal war. 1,000 years ago could have been like a meteor hitting, like big things that happened. But when it comes to like people's beliefs, my favorite thing to draw on, just because it's kind of what I gravitate towards too, historically, is like either folk heroes or prominent figures, because like it's well over 2,000 years ago. It's maybe close to 2,500 years ago. But everybody knows that General Hannibal brought elephants over the mountains into Rome. Everybody knows Hannibal just off the name of it, Even, like other names like that kind of come up, and so there's different. I like to have different factions in relation to those two. Like we remember in one of them I have like Hazarim's Wakes faction, and there's just years ago there's this General Hazarim who did all this stuff, and then it's like we're just kind of like we just really vibe with it. They're a pirate faction, so they don't really need to make as much sense as like a proper government. Like we're pirates, we just kind of use the same tactics type of thing. But like when it comes to generating different bits of lore and stuff, I normally end up making a bunch of factions. And it's like these people hate each other. Let's make an inciting event that happens. That is why they hate each other. And then normally after I have that, it's like, all right, what's a third unrelated faction that could have been affected by that inadvertently? And he just let the spiderweb kind of just grow from there. And the important thing was when you start doing that is you find out what parts of those don't fucking matter, and you remove those from the story immediately. Because because you just like add all this levels of complexity to go awesome. This doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. Even the original faction thing maybe doesn't matter because the unrelated one's more interesting. So maybe it happened with two factions that aren't around anymore.
Yeah, that's actually
you just find out what's still interesting in the story.
Well, yeah, that's actually a really good point. Just like, because I feel like, whenever you generate, you build things and you build lore, and you give things meaning. Sometimes you just are so like you just want it to like stay within the story or the scope of the world so badly, when sometimes it just doesn't work, or something else makes more sense. You have to scrap it. It can be kind of hard to do that sometimes. One thing that I like to do when it comes, especially for cities and lore, I like to kind of similar to what you were saying, Logan. When it comes to like one ideal, I like to have like almost make it a little bit more broad and make it like one thing, in the sense of like, for instance, one of the cities that you guys, one of the games I was running, Fremont, and the city, it was the heart of like it was the home to the Heartfire or the Heartfire forging grounds or something, right? It was these forging grounds that are like that are so like they're legendary. Like people like all sorts of blacksmiths come together and they build and they craft these insane weapons, and it's like a very unique thing to the city, and so that kind of gives it like the dynamic of it. Okay, like what does that do? Because that affects like how how the local guards act. It affects how the people act. There's certain customs and courtesies when it comes to certain things because of that. And I think it wouldn't necessarily have to be something so broad like that, but just one thing as like, what's the purpose of the town? Like, is it a farming?
Right.
If is it a farming village, it could be as simple as that. It's farm. Okay, what does that mean? It doesn't always have to be something unique, but it's kind of having like the reason for something. And then even for the kind of because I actually wrote out the history of the empire on Wolverine, and basically, long story short, I used like geography because there's the Caligan Plains. There's basically a bunch of marauders in the plains, and they were like onslaughting the city. Dudes, the people living on the exterior of the city, they were like, hey, this dude's not doing it right. Then there's a coup, and now it generates. It's kind of cool to also just have like driving forces that make other people do things that then create something.
Right, yeah. Because lore can, like, I like to make it, if there's anything in, like, a established lore that goes, nothing happened, then somebody did something. The only reason that would be the communicated story is because it is improper, or it is a false, or it is lost to history.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself becomes part of the lore. Now becomes part of, like, what happened, if that's an aim of the characters. But more so, it's just like, things happened because other things were happening, because other things were happening, because other things were happening, because other things were happening. Like that, like the world, it moves forward, and things came after, things came before, and like that's how lore moves. It's just whatever the story is, it's just like what you're hearing about it. There's always something driving it. There's always something affected by it too.
I think cause and effect, like you were talking about, of players doing things or not doing things, that also affects the world. Like when you're generating the world, there has to be cause and effect of like, why is this area like this now?
Well,
right.
And I think since we're on the topic, I would say I think that's something that really helped me and just helps me in general. And I'm still fleshing out some, but I think creating a timeline. I mean, you don't necessarily have to get super crazy, but I think creating a calendar, or just using the real world calendar, using your calendar that we use every day, but having something that that denotes time is really important, because then you can set things along it, and you can kind of then easily kind of put things along the timeline, and then you can kind of almost look back and see how they affect each other. Because I feel like if you just kind of be like, oh, 5 years ago, and aren't specific, that's when you can start to kind of run into the overlap and stuff. And so I think that, I mean, you don't have to go crazy, you don't have to do all this thing, because I found for me, creating a calendar is pretty easy. I kept it relatively simple, but then you also start to be like, oh, what about holidays and stuff? And so you can get really kind of into the weeds. But I think just figuring out, like, what was the starting event? And I think I finally decided on one of the starting events for the calendar in my world is the creation of the empire. Only because that is such a massive thing. Generally, that's how a lot of things come. That's when, like, the start of something, right? Because it's like, oh, here's a large collective, and this is where kind of the beginning of everyone's kind of understanding of civilization, sprouting up. But
yeah, calendars are a huge part of proper civilization.
Exactly. And so I think, and I was talking to my brother, and I was just like, yeah, I kind of want to have the timeline start out at this creation of the empire, but then, like, there's some people, as with any continent, there's indigenous people who are there much longer, and they might believe other things. But then I think too, sometimes you just can't, like, want to emphasize, like, sometimes with world building you can't get so into the weeds where you don't start writing things down, because that's where I sometimes get to, where it's like, oh, I have so many ideas, and then, like, get overwhelmed. I'm like, oh, I don't want to write everything out, be just a lot of work. But it's like, sometimes just, hey, one calendar, okay, the creation of the imperial calendar, let's start there, and if I want to go down a rabbit hole later, whatever. But you got to write things out, and that way you can have the full picture later.
One thing real quick, and then I'm gonna run and use the little boys room. But part of it too is, as you mentioned, is a huge thing that I sometimes forget, and I only recently started, like, adding it into certain parts of the game, is holidays. Holidays are a great source of culture to splash into your game, and also create a bunch of great situations.
Yep.
And the holidays don't always, and probably shouldn't, make sense.
Yeah.
Like, that make them weird, But also, like, it's holidays are almost always hallmarks of religious celebrations or historical events. So it's a good way as a DM to, like, I want to talk about my world with you guys, and you guys have been pretty resistant, as you guys have been punching badgers in the head in the cave for about 7 sessions. You guys were not interested. It was a really cool cave if you guys just looked up, but you're just punching badgers. So now they're in a part of a holiday. They need to learn why punching badgers in the cave was actually sacrilegious.
Yeah.
But one moment here.
Yeah, you're good, man. Go ahead, Logan. What's up?
For holidays, I created sprites that flow around. I call them festival phantoms, and they're tiny little sprites. So every single holiday, you can, like, they change effect based on where you are in the world, and I really like having stuff like that, because it's just like, it fills up. But I do think holidays are a really good way to, like, insert lore into a world, because you're like, yeah, there's this happening. Also, as soon as he gets back, so there's someone here at all times, I'm gonna run to the bathroom.
Oh, and then I'll run to the bathroom, so the Nox will only be here.
We'll just run out of time and be done.
Well, I think it's also really cool because you can also make it. It's a very large dynamic shift. Like, if you're in a town, nothing's happening, and all of a sudden people are, like, hanging things up, or people are acting differently, like they're acting, like, sad or something. Then people are like, "What's going on?" And that, I can drive the story. I also really like holidays per region. Like, this one is unique to here, and so maybe you experience that, you go somewhere else, and it's like, that's not the case at all. Or, like the history, what is it, history is decided by the victor, or history is written by the victor, where it's like, you have other people who are like, we are celebrating a holiday contrary to another holiday because, we lost, or that's when they came in and killed all of us, and so now it's a day to remember. But then, like, the other force is like, it was a day of victory, so it's, like, kind of cool to have those, like, dynamics. So
Absolutely. Just jumping in, hearing just that, yes.
Hell yeah, you're tagging.
Tagging out. Right, yeah. But we can't both be in it at the same time. There's only one toilet.
We're actually all in the same place.
We're all in the same house.
Yeah, very different backdrops for different for being in the same location. And then one thing I feel like touch base on, and then maybe we can wrap this up. NPCs. We talked about it briefly earlier, but NPCs, just how to generate NPCs and kind of build them. NPCs for me personally can sometimes be hard, because I feel like, on top of building everything else, you're now trying to be like, oh, let me personalize individual people that are important every single time you interact with them. And so I feel like sometimes I feel like for me, I generally leave NPCs kind of kind of vague. Like I'll give 1-2 distinct things, and then I'll just I'll let kind of the players just create something off that instead of, because I know Matt Mercer, he will just be like 15 important details about this person for every single person. I'm like, that's a lot of work. Fuck that. Like that's just like
yeah. I'm good, dog.
Yeah.
For me, I will describe them as especially in the sci-fi one, which is what I normally do. I'll describe their race. If it's anything other than human, I'll bring that up, or I'll say they're human.
Yeah.
I'll describe like what species they are, and I'll give like general vibe, and then anything else can be inquired further. Normally, and if they spend time talking with them, like and this is a kind of an important thing I started doing. If they spend time talking with them, I will begin like describing more and more things about them. I do that so I don't have them be introduced to somebody who is important that they don't know is important, and then for whatever reason I am now outlining like, oh, they're wearing this cloak, they have this armor on, they got this, they got that. Because if you just be like, oh, here's a very important person, like I'm going to describe them thoroughly now. It's like, no, like I'm going to start describing them more as we spend more time interacting with them. I think like in the Red Meyer one, I think I did a little bit more like just describing like base features, facial hair, like armor, kind of things they're wearing. But that's also a far smaller story. Like, a lot less involved in it.
Well, I also like that too, because I feel like that's almost realistic to, in some ways, like us as people. Like you might meet somebody and like you see them and you visually take them in as like as an entire person. But if it's like, yo, what's up, man? And like, oh, hey, thank you, and you like you hold the door open for someone, they say thank you, and you have such a small interaction, like 1 or 2 things stand out to you. You take them in visually as a whole person. 2 things stand out to you, but usually you forget everything else. But if you sit there and you start to actually like interact and you read and you look and you're actually then ingraining these features more into their mind, it then kind of generates more of a picture. So I actually kind of like that, because it almost is kind of that perspective of just like real life perspective,
and it's easier for me.
Exactly,
so much
1000% easier.
I will say there's times where you can over describe somebody and it does backfire, and that just goes back to the sci-fi campaign. There was a NPC that we only ever knew known as Drumstick Guy.
This motherfucker,
DSG
baby.
I'm gonna kill that man as soon as I get a chance.
Because I kept describing him, and like the first time I described him, I was like, he looks like too much, we're not going to talk with him. So it became a bit as I just describe him more thoroughly. He has more stuff going on. He's like he had like, I think one time he was leaning under a neon sign that happened to have like a big flashing like exclamation mark above his head, like lit up like just a video game NPC, like please talk to me, and just walked right by him. Things like shoulder checked him on the way through a door. Like everyone hated him, and then eventually I had the pleasure of having Gray play as Drumstick Guy and horribly betray the party, and nearly kill some of you.
I'm gonna flay him, dude. I'm gonna flay him next time we see him.
It was great for me.
But for Logan, we're talking about NPCs and how you kind of make them, and so we're just kind of talking about descriptors and so what do you do when it comes to NPCs? Like how in depth do you go, and then just how do you usually create them?
So usually I do a sheet for like I said, I do a sheet of NPCs. I like to do like a name for the NPC. I like to do whatever race they are for like merfolk or whatever, and then I give them usually somewhere that they would be and a personality trait. And then I like to build off of that. So like I do, well, this dude is going to be the tavern keeper, but he's going to be like the most bubbly tavern keeper minotaur you've ever met in your entire life. Or this is one of my players' favorite characters, one of my campaigns. I have a super depressed Eladrin. He is a winter Eladrin. I created him and I made him depressed. And that was the only trait I had for the entire thing. I was like, he's just super like down all the time, and he always thinks that people are going to take things from him kind of deal, because that's all he's ever known. And I've like building out from there, just giving them one trait and then seeing how they bounce off the player. I really like to do.
Yeah, I like that, like giving them one defining trait, because normally I'll either have something in mind, but it's never as formal as putting it in writing their trait. But I feel like the rest of that, it's like, yeah, like I'm gonna make him, like this guy's just gonna be kooky and weird. That's it. Then when it bounces off the player, it starts becoming like, he's kooky and weird. Apparently, he's a little handsy. He's like bounces around a lot. Like that's as you start describing the character, like, oh, these things become true for him because of how people are interacting.
Well, yeah. So Logan, do you? Oh, Knox is mobile. Logan, do
Oh,
you weirdo. Do you not necessarily focus so much on the physical then? Like, so you mainly do like a personality trait. Do you have like one or two things that you like to describe, like that you have also like when it comes to their physical appearance, or is it usually like? Because Connor was saying that he'll usually generate that as you talk and kind of flesh it out more. So is it like personality, and then depending on how in depth the characters will go, that's when you can be like, oh, and then they have like a big ass mustache or something, or or how do you do that?
That's usually, I mean, I have like an idea in my head, and obviously, so say that same character, that Eladrin, like in my head, I was like, well, he's like a very old elf, but he's probably a more proper blacksmith, you know? He probably has a little bit nicer attire on. He's not the apprentice that works there or anything like that, but I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted until the players were like, well, like, yeah, like, tell me about this dude that we're looking at and slowly describing, because, yeah, as long as, I mean, if the players aren't super interested in like asking more and more about this character because he's not going to show up again, then they just get his name and on with it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's what kind of what we were just talking about. I think you and I, Logan, actually kind of do it about the same way. It's like he's got a face, he's got a stash, and then like as you're talking and they start inquiring, that's when things start coming up.
Yeah. Other than important NPCs, I'll flesh out all the way. I'll know exactly what they look like, all the stuff that they have on them, just because if the players bump into them into the streets or something, I'm like, yeah, you see a dude like totally described. Mm-hmm. They continue on, and then they think back, they're like, wait, that was a little bit weird. Like, we fully saw that dude when we made our perception check or something like that, or that was something that I was really focused on. But other than important NPCs, I find that it's just normal people walking down the street. Like, some people are just going to be wearing commoners' clothes, and they're just going to be normal commoners.
Do you give them more details based on the importance, or do you... Because Connor was saying that he likes to kind of almost keep it neutral. Like, everyone gets the same introduction in a way until you start to interact. So do you give, like, if it's like, oh, this is important, you, like, kind of drop that to the players, or do you, as you progress to talk to them, you give more detail?
If the players directly interact with them, I like to keep it neutral, just because then the players don't really know if they're directly talking to someone. But like I was saying, for the street, I like to have, if I'm having the players bump into someone on the street, I like it to stand out a little bit more for that one NPC to be more described. Like, they didn't do any time in, they don't know their name, they don't know their personality or anything, but that's the main descriptor now, is like, you know exactly what this dude looks like. But then, yeah, if you go into somewhere and say the shopkeep is a super important NPC, but they never do anything to describe them, I'm not going to describe the shopkeeper more, because then later on they'll be like, oh yeah, there's this man down the street, and they're like, oh, the shop, son of a, and they'll like go back to that area or something.
What is he doing? He's going home. Follow him.
But I like if they just run into someone naturally, because sometimes players won't directly interact with someone, but it does put a thought in the back of their mind to be like, wait, that, or like, I know exactly what I was just looking at, kind of deal. Like, I should try and find that person again, so then they can like look through the streets or something for that like prominent, NPC.
Yeah, I think you and I have. It's probably also how we run NPCs. I'm curious because, as Jared just said, I kind of leave my stuff vague, and then as you start talking with them, you get to know more. Perception checks, depending on what you're looking for. Yeah, you'll see that this person is, depending on the environment, looking different. But with your NPCs, and I guess with your players, probably a question about that. Do you find your players are the ones driving the story mostly forward in social situations, or you're gonna have your NPCs are the ones having to like go to them or like find them or ambush them or whatever the situation is?
50-50. There's some scenarios where like they'll like run into an NPC and the players are just so volatile to the NPC, and it's like, all right, man, you're trying to do a story. But then I also have other times where my players will like actively seek out certain NPCs. Like, they'll have heard their name once somewhere in the world, and they will actively like be like, all right, now that I've met this person, you're gonna monologue to me for 10 minutes because I need to know everything about this person in the area around me, kind of
nice deal. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, I was just curious, just because you were saying it was like you like to bookmark and kind of like highlight, like, this is an important guy, whereas I kind of typically do, at least I perceive, I'm not the one listening to what I say, but I'm the one saying it, so that depends on what people hear. But I typically try to, like, you either already know he's important or you don't, and through conversations and such, like, I try to keep the descriptions all about base level, unless you're talking with them, and then like more features and armament and yada yada's revealed. Except, of course, our friend Andrew does have the mercenary background, which is the bane of my existence.
Yeah,
Because every time
reason.
he's just like, do I recognize any markings on there? It's like, man, he's a baker. What are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
He's making you fucking
yes,
bread,
dude.
but he is part of the Shadow Glaive.
Yeah, it's
You
like
see a
actually.
tattoo on his neck.
Yeah, it says I'm in the Shadow Glaive.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's a spelled out comic stance, believe it or not.
But-
And then here in like 15, I'll probably have to be rolling out for the day.
Well, I was gonna say I think we're just at the tail end here. I do want to just say I think that NPCs, and I think it's also important to note. I feel like, and I do like the personality, like the one personality trait you're talking about, Logan, because I feel like you can describe things all day long, but if all your PCs are shallow or you don't have a diverse like kind of interaction with them or something that's uniquely just like different about their actual speech or how they go about, with that discussion or talking or whatever it is, then I feel like, you can describe someone in full detail, but if every character has the personality of Jimbo, the baker, it's like, who gives a shit at that point? It's
We
like,
all love Jimbo.
All of,
yeah, it's
all
like,
of your NPCs being
no,
the same.
that's
as
a plot. That's a plot hook. It's in the bread. Something going on with
Oh
the bread.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's something
in the-
that every NPC in the town is totally. But I mean, like, there was something like for a situation in the home game that Connor was running for us when we got up to the one guard outpost, and they were all it was all the French, like the very serious French guards when you first met them. That was so much fun because we had been around like a bunch of the heavy metal rodeo and a bunch of stuff like that. So we'd run into a bunch of NPCs with that style. And so having, I think, more diverse NPCs with more like, hey, they're not all like rootin' tootin' shooting man out here in the corner.
Yeah.
There is this like set of people. It was much more of like, I remember that and I will remember that for a long time because those NPCs were diverse. They all each had their personalities and stuff like that.
And all of them like to monologue while pouring you a mug of wine.
Yeah,
It's
then
just a mug.
And, oh yeah, just, while they're on the clock, they're like, "You want to just get schnockered?" All right, cool. But yeah, I think that unless there's anything last minute you guys want to talk about NPCs or anything last minute for world building, I just want to say I think at the end of the day, world building can just be incredibly just so overwhelming to do. And so I think that one of the biggest things is taking it like one bite at a time, taking it at the very, just writing your thoughts down and then, not having to flesh out everything. Because I find that even just like a little more recently, just like I'll have ideas in my head and like in the past I'll like want to like write them all the way out and continue. But sometimes it's like if you have the idea in your head, you can flesh it out on the fly. You don't always have to spend hours and hours writing everything down and archiving everything. Sometimes you just gotta fly by the seat of your pants and and leave things vague. So that way when things come up and they make sense or a character says something, I can't tell you how many times a character says something, I'm like, that makes sense. You know what? Yeah, I think I'll take that.
Right.
I'll pretend
when
like
you're sitting behind the screen, scribbling on
exactly. You know what that does me? Yeah, it's funny that you know that because I knew that all along too, and you write that down somewhere.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think that and then just and then basing it and just having transparent with your players. That's why session 0 is so important. Like, what do you guys want from the session? Yeah, what do you like? Where do you want to be? What do you guys want to deal with? Because if it's like don't make a political game. Don't be in the empire with a political structure and all this crazy diverse political shit. If your players are like, I want a monster hunt. Who gives a fuck about these politics? And then next thing you're gonna have murder hobos stabbing Jimbo the baker for 6 pennies, and it's like, well, you shouldn't have put them in.
Well, he was a Rakasha. You could check the bread.
Yeah,
there's something in it.
I agree with that. I think at the end of the day too, for world building, it's just really important to be like, what do you guys find enjoyable? Like, what is enjoyable for all of us to be in? The world doesn't have to be insanely diverse or anything. If you just have 2 towns that you have fleshed out, but that is the most enjoyable 2 towns, and your players spend years there. Like we've literally spent 6 months on one town for the home sci-fi game, and it was just like that was all that was fleshed out at the time, or it was so dense while we were there. But it's like, that was enjoyable, you don't need to worry about making an entire world as long as your players are enjoying it, and as long as you're enjoying it and you can think of things on the fly. That makes good world building.
Another thing too is about world building. If someone would be watching this, like the daunting task of world building is keeping you from running a game, make a town, make a simple problem, start session 1. Like, it doesn't need to, you can world build everything you want to world build, as long as like as you're playing. You don't need to have a pantheon picked out. They just use the ones in the book. They work. You know, if someone wants to be a cleric, cool. If there's no clerics, you don't need to worry about gods for a long time. You got so many sessions. But yeah, like just if like they could be at a town and like, we got bandit trouble. They go kill some bandits, and then like you figure out the world as you're working through it.
Yeah, and I think also some of the funniest moments too is when you don't know as a DM. You know, it's like someone asks you something, and everyone knows you're blatantly like, the shit stick flower in the, and then everyone's just like, and it's a meme, you know, because I would get in my head too about being like, dude, if I don't know every single answer and I don't have something thought up ahead of time, like I'm scuffed, and I should just, but it's like you need to just be like, it's just all about the fun, man. You're just there to have fun. As long as everyone's having a good time. And remember,
5 minutes into your session anyways, you're gonna have to throw away all those notes you just written because your players are gonna far off to the left corner and become friends with the goblin, bro.
Building, nothing survives first contact with the enemy, and the players are your enemy.
Exactly.
So
for all those aspiring DMs, just do it. Fuck it.
Just do it, man. Yeah, you will have fun no matter what. You're literally just hanging out with people, and it's a group story experience. The world will build itself, pretty much.
Also, fun fact, generally, everyone needs a DM. Some group needs a DM. So if you just take up the mantle, even that in of itself, everyone will love you for it.
Yeah, 100%. When you're like, I'll DM, everyone's like, you DM, bro?
Finally!
Especially the DMs who've been forever DMs, and you're like, I'm willing to write the story. They're like, thank you. I just want to play this character. I have 62 characters I've been waiting to fucking play.
I got the super sick build.
Shout out to the two of you for being DMs, man, to free me from my eternity of DMing, man.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Gotta break it up every once in a while. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I think that. Oh, Logan, did you have one last thing? I think you were.
That was
okay, great. I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up tonight's Tavernside Talks. We always appreciate everyone for hanging out with us and tagging along. And yeah, honestly, just at the end of the day, world building. Just do it. Whether it's small or large scale, just start tackling it little by little, and eventually you'll have a full fleshed out world or town or whatever the area you're in. So, but anyway,
you don't need to flesh out the woods, just flesh out the road. All right, just wherever they're at, flesh that out.
Exactly. So. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night, and we will catch you next time, which is actually going to be in a couple of days. On Sunday, we'll be continuing our Redmire Hunt arc with Connor DMing, and we will see how weird things can get, because if the weird level started out like, I'd say started out like this, and now it's just going this, and it's just going to keep going. So tag along for that if you want to see how sketchy and see how things pan out for that. But until then,
it'll be fine for everybody.
Yeah. He made a specific poison mechanic for this, so I'm still waiting. All right, y'all have a wonderful rest of your night. We'll catch you later, and peace out.